The automatic door sighed open as the boy stepped inside, letting a wave of warm air brush over his cold, dust-covered face. His clothes hung loosely on him, stiff from dried mud. His shoes, frayed at the edges, made a soft scraping sound against the marble floor, far too quiet for a place this polished. The bank's lobby gleamed with gold accents and spotless tiles that reflected every movement like a mirror. He paused for a moment, taking it all in with wide, anxious eyes. His face held a quiet mix of hope and worry. His lips pressed together, as if afraid they might tremble. He gripped the slightly crumpled check in both hands, careful not to drop it. His shoulders curled inward, and his chin dipped as he shuffled toward the long row of counters. The distance felt enormous, every step echoing the difference between his world and theirs, behind the desks. Staff watched him with still unreadable expressions. Suits immaculate, shoes shining. Their eyes followed the boy's slow approach, curious at first, then gradually dismissive. A few whispered among themselves, glancing at his worn clothes, then back at their screens, as if he was a minor. Inconvenience, drifting through an important place. The bank manager sitting confidently in a padded leather chair noticed him last. His face lit up with a smirk, the kind that said he'd already decided what the boy's story was before hearing a single word. He leaned back casually, tapping a finger on the desk in front of him. His laugh came first, soft and amused. He was greeting a joke no one else had heard yet. The boy hesitated near the counter, eyes flicking to the polished floors, then to the tall adult staring down at him. A thin layer of fear settled behind his expression, barely visible yet unmistakably present. Still, he stepped forward and held the check a little higher, as if the paper itself might give him the courage he lacked. A security guard shifted nearby, just enough to make the boy flinch. The atmosphere tightened. Soft murmurs floated around him like a fog. Shame pricked at his spine, urging him to leave. But the reason he came stood stronger than his fear. At the manager's desk, that smirk widened. And as the boy approached, something about the manager's eyes said he was ready to enjoy whatever came next. He just didn't expect that the smallest kid in the room was carrying the biggest secret. The boy stopped a short distance from the manager's desk, clutching the check close to his chest as if it might slip away if he loosened his grip even slightly. His face tightened with a mixture of hope and hesitation. His gaze lifted for a moment, meeting the manager's, then quickly dropped again. He had walked all the way here because someone told him this was important. But as he stood in front of polished desks and tailored suits, the weight of the place pressed against him like a silent wall. His shoulders shifted uneasily. One foot slid half a step back, as if his instincts were telling him to retreat. But he steadied himself, pulling the check out farther, holding it at the edge so the inked name wouldn't smudge. He didn't understand all the numbers printed on it, only that it was his, and someone had said he needed to open an account or check the balance. The words felt too big, too adult, but he carried them anyway, across from him. The manager leaned in slightly, elbows resting on the armrests of his chair. His smile didn't soften. It sharpened. His eyebrows lifted with a forced enthusiasm, the kind that didn't hide the amusement flickering underneath. He adjusted his bright red tie with a single tug, as though preparing for a performance. Behind the manager, other employees subtly shifted their weight, pretending to stay busy while watching every second. The air grew heavier, not loud, but full of unspoken judgment. The boy felt it in the way his hands trembled, in the way the room's brightness seemed colder the longer he stood there, in the way silence wrapped around him, tightening slowly to his right. A teller leaned toward another, murmuring something under her breath. Both glanced over at the boy, their expressions fixed in polite neutrality that didn't reach their eyes. Farther back, two suited employees by the ATMs stood straighter, their faces tightening into professional masks. Even their stillness felt like disapproval. The boy didn't know what any of that meant, but he sensed it. He felt like he didn't belong here, not in these spotless hallways or under these perfect lights. Yet he stayed rooted, because leaving meant he would carry unanswered questions back home, and he desperately needed answers. The manager finally gestured lazily toward the check, chuckling to himself as though he already knew how this story would end. The sound slid through the room, light but sharp, echoing louder in the boy's mind than it did in the air. And before he even spoke a word to the boy, the manager had already decided exactly who he thought he was. The boy stepped closer, stopping just short of the manager's desk. His breathing grew shallow, barely noticeable beneath the oversized jacket hanging from his small frame. He lifted the check again with both hands, a gesture that carried more courage than strength. His face tensed with uncertainty, eyes flicking between the manager's bright smile and the glowing computer screen on the desk. His feet shifted awkwardly. One shoe bent inward from the worn sole, flattening even further against the polished marble. He tried to stand straighter, but the weight of all the curious eyes around him made his shoulders curl inward. Every movement he made felt too loud for a place built on quiet wealth. The manager leaned forward now, elbows landing on the desk with an exaggerated confidence. His smile widened, almost theatrical, as though he was preparing for an easy joke. His eyes scanned the boy's clothes, pausing on each rip and stain as if they were details in a familiar story he'd seen 1,000 times. Disbelief wasn't written on his face. It was certainty. Certainty that he already knew the ending. He reached out, not to take the check, but to tap the desk lightly with one finger, a slow rhythm that said he was in complete control. His posture relaxed even more, shoulders open, chin raised slightly. The room felt different now, carrying a thin layer of smug amusement that hung just beneath the surface. A teller standing a few desks away turned her head in their direction. Her lips pressed together in a tight, forced smile. One of the guards near the entrance shifted his stance again, not out of concern, but routine yet. The boy's eyes followed the movement nervously. He held the check tighter, fingers curled over the edges like it was the only thing anchoring him. The manager finally reached toward him, but not for the check. His hand hovered, pointing loosely toward the boy's shoes. A soft, breathy laugh slipped out, barely audible yet heavy enough to cut the air around them. Someone in line leaned subtly to the side, trying to get a better look. Another whispered something that made the person beside them glance up in quiet surprise. The boy felt the heat rise in his cheeks. His heart thudded against his ribs. He hadn't said a single word yet, but somehow, he already felt like he'd done something wrong. The manager exhaled through his nose, amused, ready to deliver the line forming in his mind, one he thought would make everyone else smirk just a little. What the manager didn't realize was that the check the boy held wasn't a punchline. It was the fuse to a moment, about to ignite everything he believed. The boy finally extended the check, far enough for the manager to reach it, his small arms trembling slightly from the effort. His face stayed tight and cautious, lips pressed together in a thin line. His eyes held a quiet plea for anyone to simply treat him like he mattered. But the moment the manager's fingers brushed the edge of the paper, everything shifted. The manager didn't take the check gently. He plucked it from the boy's hands with a swift, almost dismissive motion. As though handling something fragile wasn't worth his time, his head tilted, eyebrows rising theatrically as he glanced at the torn cuffs of the boy's sleeves before looking back at the paper. His smirk didn't fade. It sharpened, settling into the kind of smile worn by someone who believed this interaction would entertain him more than inconvenience him. The boy's shoulders dropped half an inch. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for him to feel the sting. He clasped his empty hands together, fingers squeezing tightly as if trying to pull some warmth back into them. His jacket shifted awkwardly, exposing another tear near the side seam. A small shiver traveled down his back, though the bank's interior was warm. Behind the manager, a woman in a navy suit paused mid-typing, eyes flicking toward the boy with a neutral expression that leaned more toward discomfort than empathy. She quickly looked back at her screen, pretending not to see what was happening. The quiet chorus of keyboards and distant footsteps continued, but the tension in the room thickened on, invisible weight settling. Squarely on the boy's shoulders, the manager held the check between two fingers, lifting it slightly as if presenting it to an imaginary audience. His posture was relaxed, legs spread comfortably under the desk, confidence practically dripping from him. His expression said he'd already judged every line of the boy's story, and none of it impressed him. His chin lifted, his smile widened, and amusement danced in his eyes. Still, the boy didn't look away. His brows pinched softly, his expression caught between hope and shame. He had endured comments before whispers, side glances, the quiet assumption that someone dressed like him didn't belong. But standing here, under bright lights, surrounded by polished professionalism, the sting felt sharper, more public, more humiliating. He rubbed a thumb against his palms, grounding himself. Silent endurance. That was all he had. He didn't know the rules of this world, didn't understand the unspoken hierarchy that lived within these marble walls. But he understood that leaving now would mean giving up the one thing he came for. So he stayed rooted in place despite everything inside him, urging him to shrink further. The manager leaned back, crossing one leg over the other, ready to deliver his next remark, one that he expected would cement the power imbalance even deeper. Because as far as the manager could tell, nothing about this boy suggested he was someone worth treating with respect. The manager finally lowered the check onto his desk, flattening it with the palm of his hand as though it needed taming. His expression shifted into something even more patronizing. Off-lidded lips curved into a thin, deliberate smirk. He tilted his head slightly, studying the boy the same way someone might study something unusual left on their doorstep. Amusement flickered across his face like he was already crafting a story to laugh about later. The boy stood perfectly still, hands clasped tightly in front of him. His fingers rubbed against each other uneasily, as if trying to erase the sensation of the check being snatched away. His face attempted calmness, but the strain showed in the tiny quiver of his chin. His throat tightened as he swallowed down a rising wave of embarrassment. He shifted his weight onto his left foot, the torn edge of his right shoe scraping lightly against the floor. The room watched, not loudly, not openly, but unmistakably. A teller paused in the middle of stamping a document, her eyes drifting toward the boy with a brief flash of pity before sliding away again. Another employee, pretending to fix a stack of brochures, stole a quick glance at the manager, then at the boy, then back down, choosing silence over involvement. The air conditioning hummed softly, but even that gentle sound felt colder. The lobby's bright lights cast sharp reflections on the marble floor, reflecting the boy's small frame as a warped silhouette, tiny, fragile. Out of place, the manager tapped the check with one finger, slow, intentional. Rhythm meant to draw attention. He leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on the desk, his face now holding the unmistakable expression of someone preparing to make a joke. His gaze traveled from the boy's shoes to his jacket, to his nervous hands, and finally back to the crumpled check. His smile widened, not with kindness, but with the satisfaction of confirming his own assumptions. Around them, the quiet conversations in the bank softened even more, the atmosphere shifting subtly, as if the entire room sensed humiliation settling into place. The boy felt a tool like a cold hand brushing against his spine. A familiar feeling, but sharper here. Deeper still, he did not back away. Silent endurance. That was all he had. He held his ground because this moment mattered too much to walk away from. The manager finally opened his mouth to speak slowly, condescendingly ready to deliver the kind of remark that would draw a few quiet snickers from the room. He just didn't know that the boy's quiet. Stillness wasn't weakness. It was the calm before a truth that would shatter his confidence. The boy's face tightened almost imperceptibly the moment the manager finally let out a soft, amused breath, one that sounded dangerously close to a laugh. His eyes dropped to the floor again, tracing shapes in the marble he didn't actually see. His posture shrank by a fraction, shoulders dipping, arms pulling in closer to his body as though he could make himself smaller, quieter, harder to notice. The air around him felt thicker with every passing second. His feet shifted. The sole of one shoe folded awkwardly under his weight, the worn rubber bending inward like it had given up long ago. The other dragged forward half an inch, not from confidence, but from a desperate attempt to stay steady in a room that felt increasingly hostile. His breathing slowed, a fragile effort to keep his emotions from spilling out for everyone to see. Across the desk, the manager leaned back again this time, with even more confidence. As if the boy's silence confirmed everything he already believed. His head tilted upward, his chin lifting slightly in a posture that radiated superiority. The corners of his mouth curled into a smirk he didn't bother hiding. His fingers brushed invisible dust from the lapel of his tailored suit, a gesture of casual dominance. He didn't just assume control of the situation. He relished it. The surrounding staff sensed the shift in tone. Their expressions tightened. Their posture sharpened. No one spoke. But the air filled with a strained kind of attention, the kind reserved for moments of discomfort people pretend not to notice. A teller adjusted her glasses unnecessarily. Another tapped her pen against her desk with a steady rhythm, unsure whether to watch or look away. A security guard's stance stiffened, arms folding slowly over his chest. But there was no reason for concern beyond the imbalance unfolding. The environment fed the tension. The polished floor, the high ceilings, the cold brightness. Everything around the boy seemed to whisper one message: you shouldn't be here. He blinked hard once, steadying himself. His hands pressed together so tightly the knuckles whitened, but he refused to step back. He had walked too far emotionally and physically to run now. Instead, he lifted his chin a fraction, trying to convince himself he still had a place in this vast, intimidating room. The manager noticed the tiny lift of courage, and he didn't like it. He leaned forward again, closer this time, ready to escalate the situation. Not with words that cut directly, but with actions and tone designed to remind the boy who supposedly held power here. Because the manager wasn't finished proving a point he thought he'd already won. The manager leaned closer, closing the space between them with a slow, deliberate motion that felt more like a warning than an invitation. His face shifted into a patronizing half-smile, the kind meant to look harmless, but carried the weight of someone testing how far they could push. His eyes narrowed just slightly, scanning the boy's face as though searching for confirmation of every assumption already. Locked in his mind, the boy's expression tightened. His lips pressed together again, trembling subtly before he caught them. His eyes flicked upward for a moment brief. Uncertain then, fell back to the check resting on the polished desk, as if it were the only safe place to look. His shoulders curled inward a little more, his frame pulled into itself, bracing for something he couldn't stop but could already feel coming. His hands drifted toward his sides, fingers brushing against the frayed edge of his jacket. The fabric was thin, offering no warmth, but he held onto it anyway like an anchor. His breathing slowed, deepening in a quiet effort to keep himself steady in a place designed to make him feel small. Behind him, subtle sounds of the bank shifted. A woman in line stiffened, her eyes expanding slightly as she took in the unfolding imbalance. A teller paused mid-typing, her fingers hovering uncertainly above the keys before she lowered her gaze again, unwilling to get involved. A man waiting near the lone desk angled his body, pretending to check his phone while keeping the boy in view. The atmosphere changed from silent curiosity to quiet participation. The room wasn't just watching now. It was judging. The manager straightened his tie, then pointed loosely toward the boy's shoes, slowly, mockingly. His expression carried the unmistakable look of someone preparing to entertain himself at another's expense. He tapped the desk lightly with 2 fingers, a gesture that signaled he was ready to escalate without saying a single word. The boy's knees wobbled. A tiny tremor ran through his arms. But he stood still, enduring, waiting, hoping the moment would pass without becoming worse. But knowing it wouldn't. The manager finally pushed his chair back and stood. That was the shift. The moment his authority became a weapon, he adjusted his sleeves, posture broadening, presence expanding, as if he needed to physically demonstrate who controlled the room. He didn't need hostility. His confidence alone carried pressure strong enough to bruise. He stepped around the desk slowly, each footfall loud against the marble, each movement designed to be noticed. His smile remained sharp, entertained, dismissive, locking the power imbalance fully into place. And as he walked toward the boy, everyone sensed that the manager was about to take this to a place the kid wasn't ready for. The boy's eyes widened slightly as the manager approached, each step echoing louder than it should in the polished lobby. His expression froze into a fragile mask, part fear, part confusion, part shrinking hope. His lips parted just a little as though he wanted to say something but didn't trust his voice to come out steady. He looked down instinctively, staring at his worn-out shoes as if they might shield him from what was coming. His body shifted backward by the smallest margin. Enough to reveal the instinct to retreat, but not enough to count as movement. His hands hovered awkwardly in front of him before he clasped them together again, fingers squeezing tightly until his knuckles turned pale. The gesture wasn't for comfort, it was survival. A silent reminder to himself not to tremble in front of the crowd. The manager stopped just inches away from him. Too close. Close enough to invade space. Close enough to send a message. He stood tall, shoulders squared, chin slightly raised, all the visual signals of authority in a place where appearances meant everything. His smirk softened into something colder, the kind of smile that suggested he wanted others to witness this moment. He angled his body slightly toward the lobby, making sure his stance was visible to every set of eyes drifting their way, and they were drifting. The atmosphere shifted as people subtly leaned, paused, and observed. A mother holding her toddler pulled him closer and whispered something to him with a forced smile. A businessman waiting at the express counter stopped scrolling his phone and looked up with mild irritation, as if the boy's presence was inconveniencing the entire building. Even the security guard's stance became stiffer, more alert, not out of safety, but out of expectation. The boy felt the room closing in. Not physically, emotionally. The pressure settled on his chest, like a heavy weight he couldn't shrug off. He straightened the best he could, though his body still curled inward. His breathing steady, just barely. His eyes lifted only long enough to see the manager towering over him. Then they dropped again, heat flushing across his cheeks. The manager lowered his voice, not to be gentle, but to be cruel without being openly confrontational. His tone carried all the disdain his expression already revealed. He was performing humiliation, but doing it quietly enough that no rule could accuse him of wrongdoing. His words weren't needed. His attitude was loud enough. A teller across the room sighed quietly, shaking her head but doing nothing more. A man in a suit exchanged a knowing glance with a woman beside him, one that said they believed they understood everything about this boy just by looking at him. The boy inhaled slowly, a deep breath that trembled through his chest. This wasn't new. People overlooking him. People assuming, people deciding who he was before he could speak for himself. But today felt different. Because today, he wasn't here for their approval. He was here for something bigger, even if he didn't fully understand how big it truly was. The manager leaned closer, his shadow falling over the boy like a cold blanket. The smirk faded just enough to reveal something sharper behind its annoyance, that the boy hadn't crumbled yet. He still had no idea that the next thing he touched would be the first. Crack in his own downfall, the manager finally lifted the check again, pinching it between two fingers as if he were holding something fragile, questionable, or beneath him. His face tightened into a puzzled frown. Not real concern. Just the kind of exaggerated confusion someone uses when mocking a situation. His eyes flicked from the boy to the paper, then back again, as if comparing the two made some sort of twisted sense in his mind. The boy's expression shifted ever so slightly. A flicker of hope. A flicker of dread. A flicker of something he couldn't even name. He watched the check move through the air, his breath catching each time the manager's fingers tightened around it. His hands rose instinctively but stopped midair, unsure whether reaching out would make things worse. Instead, he let them fall back to his sides, curling his fingers into the torn fabric of his jacket for grounding. The manager tilted the check toward a nearby light, squinting in mock inspection. His eyebrows arched dramatically, his lips forming a tight line of forced seriousness. He rotated the paper slowly, pretending to examine the ink. It was a performance one meant for the employees scattered across the lobby who were watching through quick, stolen glances. A teller clutched a stack of deposit slips a little tighter. A woman in line shifted her weight uneasily. Someone near the loan office paused mid-sentence on a phone call, eyes drifting toward the unfolding imbalance. The room had grown quieter. Not silent banks never were, but quieter in the way that hinted at collective, uncomfortable attention. The boy swallowed hard. His throat felt tight, like each breath scraped sandpaper. His posture sank inward as he sensed every inch of the lobby closing around him. He wasn't just being observed, he was being judged. The manager let out a soft chuckle again, sharp, breathy, dismissive. Then he spun the check between his fingers and tapped it once against the edge of the desk. The sound slicing through the tension with a hollow echo. His smirk thinned into something more calculated. He wasn't just amused now. He was preparing to make a point. The boy lifted his chin just enough to glimpse the check. Just enough for hope to rise and fear to deepen. Just enough to remember why he came. Across the room, the guard adjusted his stance, eyes narrowing with mild suspicion, as if the boy's nervousness translated into guilt. Another employee straightened their blouse, eyes darting toward the manager, anticipating what he might do next. The manager looked at the boy. Again, really looked tanned. Something in his expression flickered. A brief shadow of doubt crossed his eyes, tiny, almost invisible. But it was the first crack. He hadn't read the balance yet, but something about the check didn't match the story he had built in his mind. In the moment the manager finally scanned the printed numbers, everything he believed about the Kedan himself would start to unravel. The manager finally turned toward his computer, holding the check with an exaggerated patience that suggested this was already a waste of his time. He slid it across the scanner with a single careless push, the paper catching slightly against the glass before settling. His smirk returned for a split-second brief, satisfied, condescending like he was expecting the system to confirm his assumptions in an instant. But the boy saw something else, a small, almost invisible shift in the manager's expression. Barely a twitch. But real, the manager's eyes narrowed. His brow tightened. His lips, previously curled into a smirk, flattened just a bit as the monitor flickered and began reading the check. He leaned forward, posture no longer relaxed, but slightly edged with tension. It was subtle, most people wouldn't notice. But the boy felt it in the air. The boy's face softened with uncertainty. His brows lifted just slightly as he watched the man who had towered over him moments ago. He didn't understand the numbers or the process, but he understood one thing. Something was different. His hands uncurled from his jacket, trembling slightly but no longer pressed tightly together. For the first time, he watched instead of shrinking behind him. Subtle shifts rippled through the room. A teller stopped typing entirely. A woman in line leaned forward a little, eyes narrowing with curiosity. The security guard stood straighter, sensing not danger but change. The manager exhaled once through his nose, sharp and shaky. He clicked something on the screen, then clicked it again, faster this time. His posture leaned closer, his shoulders creeping forward. His face tugged into a strained expression, eyes flicking rapidly across the monitor. That was when the second crack appeared. His fingers hesitated, his jaw set tightly. The boy shifted his weight, taking a half step closer without even realizing it. He felt the room watching him differently now, entirely with judgment, but with curiosity. The atmosphere not loud, not dramatic, shifted with a pressure that felt like the air thickened between every person present. The manager clicked. A third time, the number on the screen didn't change. He blinked hard, looked again. Then again, his face lost a shade of its casual color. His smirk completely vanished, replaced with something unfamiliar on him, confusion mixed with something bordering on fear. He straightened his back sharply, catching himself slipping, and tried to regain the professional detachment he was known for. But this time, he couldn't. The number wasn't wrong. It was simply unthinkable. He stared at the balance again, throat tightening just enough for the boy to notice. The manager's finger hovered over the screen, trembling for the first time. His eyes darted to the boy, then back to the monitor, struggling to reconcile the image of the child in front of him with the number glowing in digital clarity. There it was, the full crack. The boy had no idea what the number meant, but he knew it meant something powerful, something that scared the manager. Because the balance wasn't just high, it was high enough to turn the entire room upside down. The manager stared at the glowing numbers on the screen as though they were mocking him. His expression collapsed in tiny, controlled fragments, first the slight lift of his eyebrows, then the tightening at the corners of his mouth, then the subtle drop of his jaw before he clenched it again. The confidence he'd worn so loudly minutes ago slipped, like water through his fingers. His face looked different now, confused, threatened, exposed. He leaned even closer to the monitor, his breath fogging the bottom edge of the glass. His eyes darted across the details again and again, hoping desperate that he had misread something. But the number didn't change. It stared back at him with indifference. Refusing to bend to the narrative he'd already crafted, the boy watched him quietly, his expression a mixture of uncertainty and rising disbelief. He could sense something shifting even if he didn't understand the specifics. His shoulders straightened just slightly, almost against his will. His hands drifted apart, no longer interlocked tightly. A tremor still moved through his fingers, but it wasn't just fear anymore. It was something new, something fragile but real. Hope behind them. The bank's atmosphere shifted like a tide turning. A teller froze mid-keystroke. A customer whispered a soft, startled sound. A woman holding a folder lowered it slowly, curiosity replacing impatience. The room leaned in, not physically, but mentally drawn to the static tension forming. Between the boy and the man who had mocked him, the manager swallowed hard. The sound small but noticeable as it cut through the silence. He clicked again, this time more urgently. He double-checked the routing information. The issuing source, the account tag. His posture grew rigid, shoulders tight, back straight as a rod. Panic flickered behind his eyes. Buried so deep, only someone staring directly at him would notice. The boy noticed for the first time. He lifted his chin fully just a few centimeters, but enough to feel like a tiny rebellion against the weight pressing down on him. His face remained cautious, but a faint spark glimmered behind his eyes. He didn't understand the manager's sudden panic, but he understood the shift in power. Something inside him unwound, loosening the knot that humiliation had twisted inside his chest. The manager finally tore his gaze from the monitor and looked at the boy really looked. The arrogance was gone. The smirk disappeared. What remained was disbelief wrapped in the beginnings of fear. His eyes flicked briefly to the staff who were watching, then back to the screen. Then to the boy's torn shoes, as if checking whether reality still made sense. His breathing grew uneven. His confidence wavered. His authority cracked. He knew now. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a glitch. The child standing before him had a balance. Larger than anything he'd expected. Larger than many. Adults he'd served respectfully. And he'd humiliated him first. The realization crawled across his expression like a shadow. Slow, cold, undeniable. And beneath that fear, a new emotion crept into dread of what the boy might say next. The manager's fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling just enough for the boy standing inches away to notice. His expression tightened into a strained mask of forced professionalism. But the cracks beneath it widened with every passing second. His eyes darted around the screen, scanning through verification tabs, transaction logs, issuing signatures, anything that might explain why the balance in front of him was so impossibly high. He clicked again and again, each click faster, sharper, more desperate. The boy watched him quietly, his expression caught between confusion and a timid kind of curiosity. His shoulders had lifted slightly from their earlier slump, though uncertainty still lingered in his eyes. He wasn't ready to feel confident, not yet, but he felt the shift. He felt the manager shrinking, not physically, but in presence. The towering authority from earlier had shrunk into someone almost nervous. His hands loosened from the tight grip on his jacket. One drifted to his side. The other rested awkwardly near the edge of the desk, fingertips brushing the cold marble surface. His breathing steadied, though every inhale still carried the weight of the eyes watching him, because the room was watching. The teller pretended to organize papers, but paused halfway through. Her gaze fixed subtly on the manager's faltering posture. A man in a gray coat stepped out of line, pretending to check the ATM balance screen while leaning just enough to see the tension unfolding. Even the security guard tilted his head a fraction. Sensing the shift in power but not yet understanding its source, the atmosphere shifted into something electric tight. Humming, expectant, the manager's hand shook openly now as he reached for the phone on his desk. He lifted it halfway, then froze. His eyes flicked to the boy again, scanning his torn jacket, his frayed shoes, his too-thin wrists. The manager swallowed hard and slowly lowered the phone back down. Calling someone meant admitting confusion. Admitting confusion meant admitting he'd misjudged this child. And admitting that meant risking witnesses. He turned back to the screen with a jerky inhale, shoulders tense. Sweat beaded lightly along his hairline, despite the cool air. His thumb tapped nervously against the desk, too fast to be casual, too uneven to be controlled. The boy shifted slightly, stepping closer without realizing it. His face held uncertainty, but something deeper flickered beneath it. A question, a dawning recognition that the power in the room was beginning to tilt slowly, subtly, but undeniably toward him. The manager clicked into the verification page one more time. The numbers still didn't change. His jaw clenched. His shoulders stiffened. His breath hitched. He wasn't mistaken. He wasn't imagining it. The balance was real, and it was high enough to expose him in front of everyone if he didn't correct course immediately. Panic settled beneath his skin, visible only in the tightening of his throat and the way his eyes avoided every employee watching him from a distance. For the first time, he felt small, and the moment he looked back at the boy, he realized with a jolt that the kid knew it too. The manager's face had shifted into something tight and brittle, the kind of expression worn by someone trying to hold their world together with shaking hands. His jaw flexed repeatedly, a tic he couldn't hide. His eyes darted from the screen to the boy, then to the lobby, then back to the screen again as if the numbers might magically rearrange themselves if he stared hard. Enough they did. The boy watched him with a mixture of confusion and rising awareness. His expression was still soft, protective, unsure, but behind it, something flickered. Something fragile but warm. His breathing steadied. His shoulders loosened a fraction. For the first time, he wasn't looking down. He was looking at the man who had towered over him just moments ago. And seeing fear where there had once been mockery, the boy didn't fully understand why. But he understood that something had shifted, something important behind them. The room caught it too. A teller leaned forward slightly in her chair, her lips parting as she tried to glimpse the manager's expression. A woman holding a stack of documents took a step to the side, pretending to adjust her bag while watching intently. Two people in line exchanged glances, quiet, sharp, curious. Even the security guard's stance straightened, his brows lowering as he sensed the tension evolving into something bigger than a simple transaction. The atmosphere wasn't just thick now, it was turning. A slow current shifting through the space. People weren't judging the boy anymore. They were questioning the manager, and he felt every ounce of it tightening around his neck like a noose. His fingers froze on the keyboard. His breath stalled in his chest. His eyes locked onto the balance again, disbelieving but trapped. He clicked the refresh button. The number didn't move. His composure cracked another inch. The boy took a tiny step back, not from fear, but from instinct, as if giving the manager space to contain the panic he couldn't hide. His hands shifted awkwardly, no longer clenched, just resting at his sides. His eyes lifted toward the monitor, then toward the manager's stiff shoulders, then toward the staff who were barely pretending to work. A whisper floated across the room, soft, uncertain but unmistakable. Someone murmured, "What's going on?" Another quietly answered, "I don't know." Something happened. The manager heard them. His face stiffened. His confidence fractured. He tried to straighten his tie, but his fingers fumbled. He tried to adjust his posture, but his spine locked in place. Every small movement revealed something he wanted desperately to hide. Fear, not loud, not dramatic, but real. Visible in the tightening of his jaw, the slight tremble in his hands. The way his breathing turned shallow. He hadn't just misjudged the boy. He had humiliated someone he now understood was far from ordinary. And the room was starting to realize it too. He leaned toward the boy with a shaky attempt at a reassuring smile, thin, unnatural, forced, but the kid saw past it. So did the staff. So did everyone watching. It was too late to hide. Because in a few seconds, the manager's quiet panic would explode into full-blown exposure no amount of pretending could contain. The manager's forced smile flickered, like a dying light bulb, bright for a second. Then gone, leaving only the exposed wiring beneath. His eyes darted rapidly across the screen, then toward the boy, then around the lobby, trying desperately to gauge how much of his unraveling had been witnessed. But he didn't need to wonder. He could feel it. The room was watching. Not out of curiosity anymore, but out of realization. The boy stood still. His expression soft but uncertain, as if he wasn't sure what to do with the shift in power settling around him. His hands hung loosely by his sides. His fingers no longer trembled the way they had earlier. His breathing was steadier, though his eyes still held a cautious fear, like he was waiting for the moment to turn against him again. But the moment didn't turn. The moment grew. His torn jacket sleeves fell slightly as his posture straightened. He didn't mean to stand taller. He simply wasn't being pushed down anymore. Behind him, the atmosphere tightened into something undeniable. A teller stood up from her chair without meaning to. A customer near the entrance took a step forward, eyes narrowing with interest. A man in a suit murmured quietly to someone beside him, his tone laced with surprise instead of judgment. The power in the room no longer belonged to the manager, and everyone knew it. The manager tried to salvage control. He inhaled sharply, adjusted his tie again, squared his shoulders, but none of it stuck. His movements were too jerky, too frantic, too exposed. His throat bobbed with each swallow. His fingers hovered over the keyboard again, pretending to verify information he'd already verified 3 times. Every second he spent trying to reassemble himself only made his collapse more obvious. He turned toward the boy with a stiff, tight-lipped expression meant to look composed, but the fear behind his eyes betrayed him. His fingers tapped the desk in a rapid, uneven rhythm, a desperate attempt to ground himself. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He closed it again. He was sinking, and he knew it. The boy watched him silently, unsure whether to step forward or step back. His expression gentled with confusion, not dominance. He wasn't trying to win. He wasn't trying to embarrass anyone. He just wanted the truth. He wanted what he came for. And somehow, that quiet innocence made the manager break even faster. The manager clicked the screen against too quickly. The tab flashed red. Invalid. He'd hit the wrong command in panic. A gasp rippled through the room. Someone whispered, "He's messing up." Another answered softly, "He never messes up." The boy's eyes widened briefly. The manager's face drained of color. He tried again, and again. Each click a confession of losing control. His authority, once a towering, unshakable presence, was now cracking in full view. The fractures widening with every frantic movement. His posture sagged. His breathing turned uneven. His professional mask slipped entirely, revealing a man terrified of what the truth meant for him. The truth wasn't just that the boy had money. It was that the boy had more power than he did, and everyone had seen him treat that power with contempt. The manager's voice finally emerged, barely above a whisper. Not strong, not confident. Barely held together, he leaned closer, attempting to hide the trembling in his hands as he prepared to say something, anything to regain the situation he had already lost. But before he could speak, something on the screen flashed that made his face collapse completely. The manager's face drained of color. The moment the new verification window flashed across the screen, his eyes locked onto the bold account details, scanning them once, then twice, then a third time, each pass tightening the panic in his expression. His lips parted slightly, breath catching as though the air in the room had suddenly become too thick to inhale. For the first time since the boy walked into the bank, the manager looked genuinely afraid. The boy saw the shift even before the crowd did. His eyes widened softly. His posture straightened another inch, not out of confidence, but out of realization. Something had changed so drastically on the screen that the man who mocked him minutes ago was now staring at it like he'd seen a ghost. The boy's fingers twitched near his side, brushing the frayed edge of his jacket. His breathing deepened slowly, filling his small lungs with air that didn't feel so heavy anymore. But confusion still colored his expression. He didn't know what the number truly meant, only that it had the power to shake a grown man. Behind him, the lobby froze completely. The teller who had been shuffling papers dropped them onto her desk without realizing. The security guard took one step forward, eyes narrowed, sensing a shift in authority rather than danger. A woman whispered sharply, "What is happening?" Her voice cracked the tense silence like a thin branch breaking in winter air. The manager tried to speak again, but his voice wavered, fragile and thin. He cleared his throat once, then twice, forcing professionalism into a tone collapsing under its own weight. He adjusted his sleeve's jerky, clumsy movements. He smoothed his tie fingers, shaking visibly. He attempted to pull himself together. But every attempt only revealed how far he had already fallen. He clicked the screen again, then again. The information didn't change. The boy shifted closer, drawn by instinct more than intention. His face held innocent confusion, not triumph. His brows furrowed as he watched the man stumble through the numbers he didn't understand. His presence wasn't threatening, it was revealing. The manager's hand slipped on the mouse. The scroll wheel spun too far. Another window opened, one showing the source of the funds. A hush swept across the lobby. Someone inhaled sharply. Someone else murmured, "No way." Another stepped closer, subtle but unmistakable. The manager's eyes widened to their fullest. Recognition hit him like a blow to the chest. This wasn't just a high balance. This wasn't just a wealthy child. This was an account type reserved for individuals far above his pay grade clients. The bank was trained to treat with extreme priority, extreme respect, extreme caution. His heart thudded against his ribs. His palms grew damp. A ribbon of dread tightened around his spine. He looked at the boy's torn jacket again, at the worn shoes, at the small hands that had held the check so carefully, and shame crashed through him with humiliating force. He hadn't just misjudged the boy. He had humiliated someone the bank was obligated to serve with absolute dignity. He turned toward the child slowly. His expression cracked open, fear, regret, disbelief, and something dangerously close to pleading flickered across his face. The boy blinked at him, unsure, too innocent to understand the collapse happening inches away. The manager swallowed hard, voice breaking as he attempted to speak. Not with arrogance, not with power, not with certainty, but with trembling, fragile desperation. Because the next words out of the boy's mouth, simple, honest, harmless, would finish the job and break whatever remained of the manager's authority. The boy shifted nervously as the manager stared at him, eyes wide, pupils small with a panic he could no longer hide. The manager's breathing sharpened, each inhale tight and shallow. His confidence, once effortless and arrogant, now hung in tatters. He tried to speak again, but the words tangled in his throat, trapped between fear and disbelief. His expression pleaded silently for clarity, for reassurance, for anything that might help him escape the collapse spiraling beneath his feet. But the boy didn't understand any of that. He only knew one thing. The manager kept staring at him like he had done something impossible. So the boy lifted his small hand, pointed timidly toward the monitor. His expression softened with innocent confusion. His eyes blinked slowly, trying to make sense of the tension he couldn't explain. His voice, when it finally came, was quiet, uneven, fragile. He asked why the number was so big. He asked if maybe something was wrong. The question was pure, naive, honest, and it hit the manager harder than any accusation could have. The entire room stiffened. A ripple of shock swept through the lobby like a shiver through cold water. A woman near the line clasped her hand over her mouth. A teller leaned back in her chair, eyes widening. The security guard exhaled quietly, a slow, startled breath he couldn't hide. The manager's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. He stepped back from the monitor one small step, but unsteady, like the marble floor had suddenly shifted under him. His hands hovered near his sides, fingers twitching uncontrollably. His face flushed with embarrassment, then drained pale, then flushed again. Because the boy's question meant only one thing. He wasn't flaunting wealth. He wasn't aware of power. He wasn't hiding a secret. He genuinely had no idea how extraordinary the account was. No arrogance. No manipulation. No intent to embarrass anyone. Just a child holding a check. The boy's innocence did what no confrontation ever could. It exposed the manager completely. The manager pressed a trembling hand against the desk to steady himself. His breath shook in his chest. His polished shoes scuffed backward across the marble, retreating from the very child he'd mocked. His voice finally escaped cracked hoarse, barely above a whisper. He attempted to explain, but his sentences collapsed before forming. The words weren't the problem. It was the shame. The crowd saw it. The staff saw it. The boy saw it. He had humiliated a child with an account at the bank, treated like royalty. A child who didn't even know he had wealth. The manager's collapse was no longer subtle. It was open, visible, complete. He dropped into his chair too fast, the wheels rolling slightly behind him. His hands pressed against the desk as if trying to steady the world. His eyes stayed fixed on the boy, fearful, apologetic, drowning in humiliation. The boy stepped closer, without thinking, confusion softening his expression. His small voice trembled as he asked if he'd done something wrong. That innocence crushed. Whatever remained of the manager's pride, his breath faltered. His posture slumped. His authority shattered. And just as the manager struggled to recover, the system pinged a notification that turned the entire bank's attention toward the boy again, and sent the manager into full panic. A sharp, electronic chime sliced through the lobby clean, unmistakable, impossible to ignore. The monitor flashed with a bright notification banner, illuminating the manager's stunned face in a cold glow. His eyes widened instantly. He leaned forward with a jolt, hands trembling as he clicked the alert open. The boy flinched at the sound, his expression tightening in startled confusion. His fingers curled around the edge of his jacket again. His breathing hitched softly, unsure whether the noise meant trouble or something worse. His shoulders lifted instinctively, tiny shield against the weight of so many eyes turning toward him. The manager's breathing faltered. He blinked once, twice, a third time. His posture froze completely because the notification wasn't just about the balance. It wasn't about a deposit. It wasn't about a correction. It was a system-generated message reserved for the highest. Priority accounts and automated flag demanding immediate VIP handling. A message that informed the entire internal network that the account holder was present in the branch. A message carrying an unmistakable tag in bold lettering. Client status. Executive-level priority. Immediate director notification required. The boy had no idea what that meant, but the manager did. And so did anyone who worked there. A teller gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. A woman in line whispered, "That's impossible." A man near the ATM stepped back with widened eyes. Even the security guard straightened, unsure what protocol applied to a child flagged as someone the bank. Leadership would personally serve. The manager's face collapsed completely. Panic surged beneath his skin. His throat tightened until it looked painful. He pressed both palms to the desk, knuckles going white as he tried to stay upright. His authority wasn't cracking anymore. It was disintegrating. He clicked frantically through the notification details. Each line only made it worse. Account tagged for executive oversight. Verification requires director approval. Client flagged as high-impact beneficiary, immediate courtesy protocol recommended. His chest rose and fell too quickly. Sweat pooled at his temples. His collar suddenly looked too tight, choking him with every breath. The boy stepped closer. His eyes wide and unsure, voice small as he asked if something bad happened. Just a simple question. Just innocent worry. But to the manager, it was the final blow. He had mocked an executive-level client child. He had humiliated him publicly, and the entire room had watched. The staff behind him exchanged looks sharp, surprised, judgmental. Their gazes no longer landed on the boy. They landed on him. Whispers spread quickly. Did he really laugh at that kid? He talked down to him. He didn't even check first. He's in trouble. Serious trouble. The manager heard every word. His chest tightened. His shoulders curled inward. His composure vanished completely. He reached for the phone. Again this time with both hands, but his fingers slipped against the receiver, knocking it sideways. The clatter echoed across the marble floor. Freezing the room in startled silence, the boy stepped back, alarmed by the noise. His face tightened with concern, not anger. He didn't understand why the man was falling apart, but the manager understood perfectly. This wasn't embarrassment anymore. This wasn't a simple mistake. This was career-ending. He looked up at the crowd faces staring, judgment heavy, expectation rising. His expression twisted into desperate remorse, the kind that comes too late. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words broke before they formed, and the boy, small, confused, undeserving of any of this, stood there, watching the man who had towered over him crumble into something fragile and frightened, because the moment the branch director walked in summoned by that notification would decide the manager's fate. The heavy glass door at the back of the lobby swung open with a quiet hissa. Sounds so ordinary on any other day. But in this moment, it struck the room like the drop of a gavel. Every head turned. Conversations died. Even the steady tapping of a teller's keyboard halted mid-stroke. The branch director stepped inside. A tall, composed figure with an expression carved from calm authority. Their suit was crisp, their stride purposeful, their presence instantly commanding. They scanned the room slowly, eyes sharpening as they sensed the unusual tension clinging to every surface. The air shifted around them, tight, charged, expectant. The boy stiffened instinctively. His eyes widened with fear. His shoulders tucked inward again, as if bracing for punishment he couldn't name. His fingers curled into the frayed lining of his jacket, holding on to the only familiarity he had in the room. The director's gaze swept past customers, past tellers, till it landed on the manager, and the manager crumbled a little more. His face tightened into a panicked grimace. He hurried around the desk so fast that he nearly stumbled, his polished shoes slipping slightly on the marble. He tried to straighten his tie, but his fingers fumbled. He forced a smile that couldn't hide the tremor in his jaw. His body folded into a slight bout, too fast, too sudden, too desperate. The director didn't return the smile. Instead, their eyes drifted to the boy. A boy standing, small and alone. A boy with worn-out shoes and dirt on his sleeves. A boy who looked terrified just from being noticed. The director's expression softened instantly, shifting to controlled concern. Their brows lowered slightly. Their posture relaxed not toward the manager, but toward the child. A silent acknowledgement that something was deeply wrong. The staff felt the shift. A teller exhaled shakily, finally understanding the severity. A woman in line whispered, "They're here for the kid." A man nodded slowly. "This is serious." Even the guard stepped aside, giving the child space he didn't understand he deserved. The manager spoke first words, tumbling out in frantic fragments. He gestured at the screen. He gestured at the check. He gestured at the boy. He tried to explain. He tried to excuse. He tried to erase the last 15 minutes with a breathless performance of professionalism. But nothing landed. The director didn't even look at him. Their attention stayed on the child. They crouched slightly, lowering themselves to eye level with him, not an act of pity, but of respect. Their voice dropped into a warm, steady tone, the kind used to speak to someone important, someone valued. Someone seen. The boy flinched at first, not ready for kindness. His eyes dropped to his shoes. His fingers twisted in the torn fabric of his jacket. He quietly explained he just wanted to check the number on the paper. Nothing more. Nothing less. The director listened. Really listened. And that was the moment the room understood. The wrongdoing wasn't the boy's. It was the manager's. And there would be consequences. The director stood again, posture straightening with unmistakable authority. Their expression chilled ever so slightly as they turned toward the manager cold. Sharp, decisive. The manager took a step back, dread tightening around him like a rope. His breath caught. His shoulders curled. His eyes flicked desperately around the lobby, searching for an escape that didn't exist. The director spoke quietly, too quiet for the boy to hear, but loud enough for the staff nearby to understand. And their faces said everything. The decision had been made. And it wasn't in the manager's favor. He tried to respond. A whisper, a plea, a desperate attempt to salvage himself. But his voice crumbled immediately. The boy watched with wide eyes, unsure whether to feel responsible or relieved. The manager wasn't being scolded. He was being dismantled. And when the director asked to move the boy to a private office, the entire room realized the final blow was coming next. The director placed a gentle hand near the boy's shoulder, not touching, just guiding, inviting him to follow toward the private office. The boy hesitated, his face tightening with uncertainty. His eyes flicked between the director's calm expression, the watching crowd, and the manager, who suddenly looked like the smallest person in the room. His steps were slow, cautious, almost apologetic. His worn-out shoes made soft, uneven sounds against the marble floor, each scuff cutting through the silence of a lobby holding its breath. He didn't know why everyone was staring now. He didn't understand how a simple question had turned the whole place upside down. He only knew he was being treated gently for the first time since he walked in. Behind him, the manager stood, frozen shoulders hunched, posture collapsed, eyes wide with dread. His face carried the exhausted defeat of someone who realized too late how deeply they'd misjudged a situation. He watched the child walk with the director, and the realization hit him with full force. He had mocked a VIP client in front of the entire branch. He had humiliated someone the bank was obligated to protect. He had done it loudly, publicly, cruelly, and now everyone had seen it. A teller whispered softly, "He's finished." Another responded under her breath, "They'll let him go after this." A customer crossed his arms, shaking his head with visible disapproval. Even the security guard stood still, posture stiff, as though witnessing something irreversible. The manager's chest tightened. His breath shook. He rubbed his forehead with a trembling hand, desperate to hide the panic clawing up his throat. His polished shoes shifted unsteadily, as if his legs couldn't decide whether to stand or flee. But he had nowhere to go. His authority, once towering, unshakable, had completely collapsed. He could feel the eyes on him, judging, remembering, condemning. The director paused, halfway across the lobby, and turned. Their gaze locked onto the manager, cold and expressionless. With a single, sharp gesture, they summoned him to follow. Not politely, not professionally, commandingly. The boy turned to his face soft with confusion. He didn't know this gesture meant the manager was being summoned to answer for his actions. He didn't know the weight behind the director's tone or the severity of internal protocols about mistreating high-priority clients. He only knew the manager looked scared, real fear, real consequences, real collapse. The manager walked forward slowly, each step heavy with dread. His tie sat crooked, his collar wrinkled, his hands shook at his sides. The confident man who had mocked a child minutes ago no longer existed. When they reached the office, the director ushered the boy inside first, offering him a seat with gentle respect. The boy sat carefully, hands folded in his lap, eyes darting nervously around the quiet room. The director stayed standing. The manager hovered near the doorway, unable to breathe deeply. His expression wore the hollow look of someone already condemned. The director asked the boy a few soft, simple questions: who brought him here, whether he needed help, whether he understood his account. The boy answered quietly, honestly, and with each innocent reply, the manager's face collapsed more. Every detail confirmed what the director feared. The boy hadn't flaunted anything. He hadn't caused trouble. He hadn't been rude. He had simply asked for help, respectfully, timidly, humbly, and the manager had responded with humiliation. A silence filled the room, a silence that stretched, heavy and suffocating. The manager's breathing grew uneven. His hands wrung together helplessly. The director finally turned to him. Their voice was low, controlled. Deadly calm. The boy didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. It was the tone used when something irreversible was being decided. Outside the office, the entire staff stood still, waiting, listening for clues. Knowing a verdict was being delivered behind the closed door, when the manager finally tried to speak, his voice cracked half apology, half panic before the director quietly cut him off. His lips pressed together, eyes burning with regret he couldn't undo. He had humiliated the wrong child, and his career was paying the price. All that remained now was the director's final decision, a decision that would decide whether the manager walked out of the office or walked out of the job. The office felt too quiet, too still, the kind of silence that waits for a single decision to break it open. The boy sat in the oversized chair, feet not touching the ground, hands folded tightly in his lap. His expression softened into something small and vulnerable. His eyes wandered between the director's calm posture and the manager's collapsing frame, trying to understand why the room felt so heavy, why adults suddenly acted like they had done something wrong. He didn't know that his presence alone had become a mirror that showed every person in the room who they really were. The manager stood near the wall, shoulders hunched so deeply that his spine curved forward. His hands trembled at his sides. His breathing was quick, shallow, uneven fear settling in his chest like a weight he couldn't shake off. His tie was crooked, forehead damp, eyes bloodshot from panic. Every inch of him looked stripped of authority. He wasn't standing like a manager. He was standing like a man waiting to hear how badly he had failed. The director remained still, hands folded behind their back. Their expression carried no anger, only something sharper, something colder, something final. Their gaze traveled from the boy's worn shoes to the manager's trembling hands, mapping out the imbalance that had started this entire chain of events. Finally, the director spoke. Their voice was calm, measured, impossible to misunderstand. The boy didn't fully comprehend the words. They drifted over him like soft wind, but he understood the tone. It was the sound of someone delivering a truth that couldn't be avoided. A truth that would change things. The manager's reaction told the real story. He staggered back a step. His breath caught midair. His eyes widened with disbelief before shame overtook them. His hand rose instinctively to his forehead, covering his face as if he could hide from the consequences settling onto him. He whispered something in apology. A plea, a broken plea for understanding, but his voice cracked under its own weight. His knees buckled slightly and he had to grip the edge of the desk just to stay upright. He wasn't being gently corrected. He wasn't being warned. He wasn't being asked to reconsider his behavior. He was being removed. The director's decision wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was clinical, professional, precise. The manager was relieved of his duties, effective immediately. He would be escorted out. His access revoked. His authority gone. His reputation shattered in front of the very people he once commanded. The boy didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He didn't understand the magnitude of what had happened. He only knew the manager looked sad and confused. And small, he whispered softly if he had gotten someone in trouble. His voice was fragile, hesitant, full of guilt he didn't deserve. The director knelt beside him, lowering themselves gently, speaking in a tone filled with reassurance. They told him he had done nothing wrong. They told him he was brave for coming in. They told him he deserved respect more than he had been given. The boy's brows lifted. His expression caught somewhere between relief and disbelief. No one had ever spoken to him like that inside a place so big. The director guided him through the paperwork he didn't understand, explaining everything in simple pieces. They made copies for him. They walked him through his account step by step. They placed the check in a protective envelope and tucked it carefully into his jacket pocket as though handling something precious. When the boy finally stood, the director walked him out into the lobby themselves, and the lobby reacted as if witnessing something sacred. Customers stepped aside. Employees stood straighter. The security guard offered a respectful nod. The tellers softened their expressions, not because they knew who he was, but because they now knew what he wasn't. He wasn't someone to look down on. The manager, escorted toward the door, kept his head lowered, a broken figure walking past the same crowd he once commanded. He didn't look at the boy. He couldn't. Shame had weighted his steps into slow, heavy drags across the floor. The boy didn't watch him leave. He didn't need to. He stepped out of the bank quietly, the afternoon sunlight warming his tired shoes. He looked at the envelope tucked in his jacket, unsure how something so simple could cause so much noise in a world he didn't understand. But above everything else, one truth followed him out. Sometimes, the smallest person in the room carries the kind of worth no one sees until the moment. The world is forced to look, and on this day, a child walked into a bank looking for answers and walked out having changed it. Because respect isn't earned through clothing, wealth, or power, it's owed to every human being the moment they walk through the door.